for joining us today. And a couple of just other housekeeping things. We're going to have about 15 to 20 minutes of speaking from Bethan, and then we'll have kind of a time for Q&A afterwards, roughly another 20 minutes. We ask that if you can use the Q&A section on the top bar rather than the chat to post your questions. Feel free to post them throughout, and then at the end we can get to them. And yeah, with that, I think I'll pass over to you, Bethan, and let you introduce yourself.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Jacob. And thanks to Sun for pulling this session together and for inviting me. It's great to see, in fact, both the institutions I studied at being part of Sun, even though I was nothing to do with space when I was at university. I was a psychologist by training, but Queen Mary and Birkbeck both made the list. So that's lovely to see. So to introduce myself, my name is Bethan Macaulay. I head up talent at Astroscale. For those that haven't come across Astroscale before, we are a space sustainability company. So we are looking to ensure the ongoing access to a safe space environment for generations to come. And we do that through things like active debris removal, end-of-life services, and we're also working on refueling and refurbishment missions at the moment as well, essentially to try and stop space being the throwaway culture that it's become over the last kind of 50 years or so. But we're here today to talk more specifically about CVs and getting a job and how to break into this incredible industry. So on my agenda today, what's in a CV? So what should you include? What shouldn't you? What does good look like? I've got a touch point on international students. I know the process can be a little bit more complicated. There's a little bit more risk there for you folks. So we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail. A slightly wider view on assessment processes. So they can sometimes feel a little bit scary. Different organizations do some really different things. So we'll try and demystify some of that for you as well. And then, as Jacob said, we've got lots of time, hopefully, for lots and lots of questions. So please feel free to fill the Q&A with anything and everything that's on your mind at the moment. So we will get started with what's a CV. So primarily the purpose of a CV is to demonstrate your skills and experience. So you're using this to primarily tell the person that is looking after the job that you want to apply to why you meet all the criteria that they're looking for, and why you've got the relevant skills that will make you good at this job. So you should be looking to list out tools or technologies that you've used. It could be pieces of software. It could be ways of working. It could be different methodologies. It could be familiarity with different principles. So things like the V model in systems engineering. It's a chance to talk about projects that you've been involved in. So they could be as part of your degree, they could be things you've worked on if you're a member of a university society, it could be competitions that you've entered with friends or in isolation, any extracurricular clubs or teams, so even things that aren't necessarily related or directly kind of clearly linked to your degree or to the job that you're applying for. It can be really helpful to demonstrate that you're a real life 3D human being, and not just a set of qualifications on a sheet of A4, and obviously qualifications that you've attained. For the majority of people, the most relevant and the most recent thing that you're going to have been up to is probably the degree that you've done. So this will become a theme, but recruiters are lazy. And I will remind you frequently through the course of this presentation that recruiters are lazy. And the best thing you can do is make our lives as easy as humanly possible. And the best way to do that through your CV is to make clear how you meet the requirements of the role. So spell it out to us. If we use a particular word, try and make sure that when you're describing that same skill or situation, you're using the same word. So a really great example would be something like space situational awareness. So we see it called space situational awareness. It's sometimes called space domain awareness. Um, and sometimes you get in space situational awareness as well. So whichever word in that example you saw used in the advert, try and reflect that same language in your CV, so that if it is somebody that isn't technical, that doesn't come from that universe that's reviewing it, it's a simple matching exercise for them, and you end up looking like a better candidate, even though they all mean the same thing. The clearer you make it that you have the skill, the more likely you are to get past that initial CV review. Similarly, have a look at the way that the job description or the job advert is structured. So in terms of the lists of essential or desirable criteria, most organizations will put the things that are most important to them at the top of the list. So make sure that when you're structuring your CV, you're also putting those things that you've got that are most relevant, that match those highly desired skills, closer to the top of your CV. The more you make a recruiter work to find that information, the less likely they are to put in that work, because recruiters are lazy. In terms of things to include, but also to an extent not to include, add some demographic information, but make sure it is necessary for the role. So by that I mean add a rough location, but a town or a city is absolutely fine. I don't need your full address. I certainly don't need your postcode at this point. And equally, if it's that you're, studying a long way away from where the job is posted, it's fine to highlight that you're open to relocating for that position as well. A working and accurate phone number. The number of candidates I've really been interested in talking to and have not managed to get hold of because there's a typo in their phone number, or they've missed a digit, or any number of things, is really sad and disappointing. And again, I and other recruiters will get lots and lots of applications. It's really unlikely we're going to go hunting under bushes to try and find you and figure you out. You should and you need to make sure that your contact information that you're giving is up to date and it is accurate when you put it on your CV or when you enter it into application forms as well. A professional email address. Unfortunately, pokemaster05@hotmail.com is not the most useful thing you could put on your email address. First name, surname, at whatever provider you choose to use is perfection, and variations of that are absolutely fine. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's another thing that can help you to stand out and to show that you've put some thought into it and given it proper consideration, just to make sure that you've got an inoffensive or as inoffensive as possible email address on your CV. And beyond that, try not to provide any information that the employer doesn't need. And to an extent, I mean, don't give people information that could be used to discriminate against you, positively or negatively, unless it's absolutely required. So things like age, gender, and a little bit less relevant probably for most of this audience, but things that we see sometimes from older candidates are things like marital and parental status. Completely irrelevant, do not impact your capability to do the job, and potentially are a factor that could lead to somebody who's not running a fair process using that information to discriminate against your application. If they don't have it, they can't use the information in that way. So I said about demonstrating your experience, and that is quite a tenuous and an uncomfortable thing to have to do. So, one, you don't have to have done everything. So please don't panic. Don't rush out and get 72 jobs and apply for every work experience program that's ever existed. There are transferable skills. There will be things that you have already done and that you're already aware of that give you the same capabilities, the same skill set, but it's just about understanding how those relate to other things. Most organizations, especially in the space industry, who are hiring for graduate and early career positions, are really, really aware how difficult it is to get specific space industry experience, because we are the ones that give you that opportunity. And we maybe have 5, sometimes 10 opportunities within our organizations every year. So we know that the chance to get that experience is really limited. But back to my point about recruiters being lazy, you can show them where you've gotten the same experiences that you might have built in a space organization from another context. So that might be a part-time job that you have. It could be project work. It could be extracurricular teams. So, organizational skills that you would potentially need for an engineering position could be picked up in any one of those 3. So it's about looking at how the skills that an employer is looking for turn up in other situations and other contexts. Also think about how you as the individual have been that influence. So a CV is one of those rare opportunities where you actually are expected to show off and to brag and to make it about you. This is your document. So consider what impact you made in that situation or that context that might not have happened had you not been the person to perform that function, or if that function weren't performed at all. I'll give you some examples because that can still be quite nebulous to try and tackle. So, example 1 is from an extracurricular team. So the candidate here covers how they made a difference to the success of the team. They referenced tools that are relevant to the application or the role, as well as some of the soft skills that they used or developed during the process. So leading a team, the achievement was a 20% increase in payload carrying capability. They used it, they optimized it using Abacus. They've mentioned some other testing capabilities. And then the outcome contributing to the project's recognition as most controllable. Great example, really clear, really explicit for me to understand how that individual has helped. Example 2. This one's using their academic work to demonstrate how a project might be relevant. And here, I think the really key thing is looking at how that would have had a real kind of a real life impact if this were a corporate or a commercial project. So there's a little bit of context selected from a number of students to do an exchange at Sydney. What their role was, so principal orbit engineer. But what we're really interested in, saving a simulated client $2 million. This is a significant cost saving, and any business would be delighted. But again, we've got detail about what platforms they used to do it, and what the actual capability was. And again, we've got some soft skills being brought in and being referenced here as well. And my third example is a non-space work experience. So again, we've got soft skills demonstrated here, like collaboration, organizational skills, research capability, all of which are really likely to be things that are asked for in graduate and entry-level positions, and all of which are super relevant and transferable to a space context, despite the fact that Vicentis are not a space organization. So all of these examples are actually taken from our 2025 batch of graduates. So they're all genuinely successful CVs because they made it through our recruitment process and are now 6 weeks into their graduate roles. And I think really important to share is that it doesn't have to be space related, and this third example is one of my favorites for that reason. So we did a bigger analysis of our 2023 application class and the graduates that we brought in, that we haven't yet had time to do for the 2025 class, but watch this space. Updated statistics will come out at some point. But for the 2023 class, the 13 graduates we brought in, 10 of them did have work experience. So it demonstrates that actually going out there and doing something beyond just your academic curriculum can be really valuable, and it is really important. However, only 4 of those 10 had space work experience. So actually the majority had work experience in something else. So if you can get it, absolutely great, amazing, make the most of it, really enjoy it. I'm sure it will be an incredible opportunity. But absolutely don't assume that if you didn't get the chance, that it rules you out of having opportunities or being successful in getting jobs in the industry once you graduate. Working part-time in cafes, in customer service roles in shops, handling calls in a call center can all be really practical skill sets that you can apply to your later career, as well as actually just proving the basics that you can reliably turn up on time and you know how to function in a workplace. Which are really underrated skills and really easy things to be able to demonstrate by doing something like part-time work. So, our next topic on international students. So, we know that getting opportunities at the early career level is already super competitive, and that is made so much harder for international students. When you add in complexities like export control, which is a really movable feast with geopolitics where they are in the world at the moment, security clearances that some organizations require, as well as potentially needing visas, obviously make that application process even more competitive and can make it really disheartening as well. Obviously, the graduate route visa can be really useful. It gives you 2 additional years to stay here in the UK beyond the end of your program, but they don't fix everything. Obviously, there would then be, in most cases, a requirement to sponsor beyond that. And for some organisations, that's a really tricky barrier to overcome, and it doesn't help in situations where there are export control restrictions as well. A couple of hopefully useful points. If you're not aware, the government does maintain a public list of organisations who hold a skilled worker sponsor licence. So not every business can sponsor a visa. You have to go through a lot of government red tape and hoop jumping in order to get a licence that will let you sponsor visas, mostly to make sure that you're not doing awful things like human trafficking or engaging in modern slavery. So it's for the right reasons that there's a lot of hoop jumping, but it does mean that it is something that not every organisation does. But because the government maintains this public list, it does mean that you can have a look through that list and hopefully make a short list of organisations where they are able to offer you that sponsorship, and that is a possibility. So that might help with targeting some of your applications. And the other piece of advice is to look at adjacent industries as well. And this isn't just relevant for international students, absolutely as relevant for home students in this instance. Because space can be so competitive, it's not the case that you only have the opportunity when you are coming out of university. There are lots and lots of industries that have similar skill sets and similar requirements, and at the moment, similar skill shortages to the space industry. And sometimes having a year, 2 years of experience in a workplace, in an engineering context, can be helpful in helping you kind of evade that early career step and join the industry a little bit later down the line and bring with you a wealth of context and adaptability that somebody who's only worked in the space industry isn't going to have. A note on assessment processes. I will disclaimer this by saying that the assessment process is one of my favorite parts of recruitment. If anybody ever meets me at a conference and wants to talk about this, I happily will. It's what I wrote my master's thesis on, and I can talk about assessment for days. Psychometric testing. Okay, it sounds scary. It sounds terrifying. It's got psycho in it. This is awful. Um, Mostly it's used by larger organizations. It should be pretty limited in its use, but a lot of people don't. And a lot of people don't because they don't really understand what the benefit of psychometric testing is. So there isn't a way necessarily to prepare for psychometric tests. Often they're based on things like personality testing, abstract reasoning. And actually, if you use these later in a process or once somebody's joined an organization, they do have real value and they can be very helpful to support people when you're joining a company or structuring a team. But don't beat yourself up if you can't pass a psychometric test because they actually have very little or no reflection and they're not a measure of capability and they won't dictate your performance now or what you may go on to perform later in your career. Assessment centres. Another slightly terrifying sound that we've come up with here. But in reality, they're just a collection of tests or assessments all done in one day and in one location. Sometimes that location is online, but we're seeing that a little bit less these days. It could be anything from building Lego sets as part of a team. It could be creating a presentation. It could be a one-on-one interview. It could be providing a response to a technical quiz. There are all sorts of scenarios that could form the different assessments under that umbrella of an assessment centre. But ultimately, it's just a chance to see all of the candidates at one opportunity and compare them against one another in a little bit more of a real life and a practical situation. These are also often done in groups, which sometimes can add to the pressure when you're seeing your competition rather than not knowing who else might be in contention for it. But also, it takes a little bit of the view off you, so you know that the assessors aren't going to be scrutinizing you 100% of the time. So sometimes having that bit of interaction can help relax and help it feel a little bit more like a university situation. Most of you will have at some point probably come across an interview already. So these are probably the most familiar situation and they are the one that you can prepare the most for. The depth of the information you'll need probably is going to vary based on who it is you're interviewing with. And most organizations will provide upfront at least the name of the person that is going to be interviewing you, and you can go and research who they are and what they do in the organization to help you get a sense of what they might be doing. Or they might tell you what the function of that interview or that interviewer is to help you with that preparation. So take some time to refresh yourself on the job description and in some contexts the organization, having a couple of specific questions about what the organization does or a mission that they might be working on or have launched recently, just to demonstrate that you actually know who it is you're talking to and you do remember what the job is you bothered to apply for. You can also look up some example questions. So quite often in what's called competency interviews, there are fairly standardized questions that a lot of organizations use and that come up time and again. Those can be things like think of a situation where you've had to deal with interpersonal conflict. How did you resolve that and how did you fix the situation? Or can you tell me about a time where you've made a mistake? And how did that come about and what did you do to rectify it? How did you learn from that situation? So it's useful to have a look at some of these and to practice coming up with some of the answers. Obviously, you'll never be able to guarantee exactly what's going to come up, but having that understanding of what might and having a few easy pathways to examples or answers as to how you respond to that. there might be situations where you're asked a question about a situation that you haven't actually encountered. And in that instance, you can be honest and say, this hasn't come up for me yet, but here is how I would approach that if I did find myself in that situation. The STAR format, so STAR, is a really good way to structure your answers. So that stands for situation, task, action, result. So when you're thinking of that example and you're thinking of the answer that you give, try to structure your response so you describe a little bit about what was happening, what the specific activity was that needed to be completed, what did you do, so the action part, and what happened as the outcome for that, so the result. And so practicing some of those can make it seem more natural, and it can mean that when you come up with against those stock questions, you have a response more readily available to be able to pull out of your hat. And finally, technical testing is the last thing I'll touch on. As it says on the tin, it's looking to see what knowledge you have, where the gaps are, or where your particular strengths might be. These might just be done as part of an interview, so you might have specific deep dives on a particular technical area, or you might be given them as a separate assessment. Often they're used really widely in skills that have a specific, or in roles, sorry, which have a specific technical skill. So something like kind of testing your understanding of orbital dynamics for positions in things like flight dynamics. Or we see them used really heavily in software development roles as well, either in-person kind of paired coding exercises or take-home coding tests as well. But all of these have some element where you can be prepared, and ultimately making sure that you have a good understanding of what you're there to talk about and your own experience is one of the easiest ways that you can become comfortable at navigating yourself through assessment processes. And that is everything I've got prepared, and I will now hand it over back to all of you and any questions that you might have popped in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Bethan. That was really, really good, really insightful. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A. So we've had some people post, and then we also received a few before the webinar started. So I've popped those in as well. Perhaps if you want to go through, choose any ones that you think are particularly good questions to answer.
Okay, let me have a look. Let's start at the top. How would you recommend weighing experience gained as part of a degree versus extracurricular experience? For example, how would you weigh a space debris related piece of coursework versus an extracurricular project where you designed and tested a drone? I think it depends on the job that you're applying for, would be my answer to this. So if you were applying to Astroscale, we're probably going to be a little bit more interested in your space debris work, than necessarily the design and testing of a drone. However, if you're applying to a company like Vertical Aerospace, they're probably a lot more interested in the drone than they are in the debris work. Both are really valuable, and for me, it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's about the relevance, and it's also about how you talk about them. So being able to demonstrate that even if it was done as part of your coursework, you still are passionate and interested about these topics. I think sometimes there can be I think presented in the wrong way, it might seem as though you did the debris project because you were pushed to do it. So if it was a part of your standard curriculum, whereas if you did it taking part in extracurricular activities, they are a choice, and so that might seem as though it's something that you're potentially more passionate about. Popular question: do you recommend having a CV that is longer than one page? I think I get asked this every time I do anything about CVs. I don't have a particular preference, and some organizations and some recruiters will. For me, I would much rather have a CV that is a page and a bit, but that all the information is relevant and presented very nicely. If to get everything you want to say onto one page, you are having to take out all the margins or change the line spacing, or you've written it in size 10 font, none of those things are going to enamor me towards your CV. I would much rather it was a page and a half and you wrote it in a sensible sized font than you forced it to be a page for the sake of a convention of making it a page. By that same logic, I don't think in the early career space your CV needs to be 3 to 4 pages long. I really wouldn't encourage it to be any more than 2, but I think leaking beyond a page is absolutely fine. What's the recommended format to write a CV? I would always, so what I personally do is I keep my CV in Word format so that I can make changes to it, I can adjust it, I can play around with it. I, despite being incredibly happy and I love my job, because I know this is being recorded and it's genuinely true, but I always keep a copy of my CV, and as I do new and interesting projects, whilst they're fresh in my mind as I've just completed them, I add them to my CV when they're there and they're ready and I have all the information I need, rather than it being, 5 years down the line from when I did something I'm super proud of, and I'm trying then to scrabble to remember what the outcome was or what a particularly specific achievement around that was. So I do try and keep on top of my CV in terms of achievements, and so it lives in a Word format for that purpose. If I then need it for something, I then export it as a I make the changes that I need to. I export it as a PDF and I save that then as the particular date and the purpose for which I've exported that CV. And then I would submit it generally in a PDF version. Sometimes with Word and going from Google Doc into other systems and things like that, if it is an editable format, sometimes that formatting can get disrupted when you're uploading it to different portals. Whereas with a PDF, it tends to be very protected, and you know that nothing can really go wrong in terms of the formatting behind the CV. How often does the government list of skilled workers sponsor license holders updated? Is there an efficient way to filter it by industry? I think it's a live list. I think as organisations either gain or lose licenses, I believe the government maintains it. Is there an efficient way to filter it by industry? Unfortunately, no. It's in alphabetical order. So it's, as in often government cases, not the most user-friendly thing. Again, I haven't used it for a little while, but it may have improved. But at least the last time I interacted with it, it was a big long alphabetical list that wasn't searchable or refinable. Are there particular adjacent industries where engineering graduates commonly transition into space roles? So we see quite a few folks come from automotive and aviation, neither of which probably will be big surprises. We've had a few from rail, which I think is a really interesting one, especially when it comes to some of the software work. Rail can be quite an interesting one. We've had a couple out of nuclear. So generally things that are either hostile environments in an engineering context or safety critical environments in an engineering context are much more easily transferable over towards the space domain. Formula One, if you can get into it, is obviously very transferable. More often we see it, unfortunately, go the other way, that we lose folks out of space to Formula One because they do pay incredibly well. So I think it's more likely that folks go the other way, but absolutely wouldn't rule it out. And in fact, we've got somebody to come in January who is coming to us from the Formula One universe. As a graduate, I expect to need to apply to lots of opportunities. Do you have advice on tailoring a CV when submitting a large number of applications? I think there probably are tools out there that will do this with AI. I'm not against that. I think it can be a really helpful tool to start the process and to kick that off. Um, but I would really heavily advise only using that as a draft. So I would still really carefully review what is spat out by generative AI before I submitted it to any organization. Um, it can be really helpful. I think it's more useful to use something like generative AI to create the first draft of your CV and then to work and tailor it and tweak it yourself from there. But unfortunately, there isn't really a way, I think, to uh, to get something else or to do something else to tailor your CV without potentially damaging your chances by not making it as specific, which probably isn't the answer that was being hoped for when the question was asked. But I think you do yourself a better service putting in a smaller number of higher quality applications than sending one CV to 1,000 organizations that is very generic. If there are a few different specialisms or a few different areas that you're targeting, you can have a baseline CV for each of those. So when I was coming out of university, not a space related anecdote, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I definitely didn't think I would work in the space industry, but I was coming out of a psychology degree. I thought I might want to go into publishing. I thought I might want to go into consulting. Thankfully, that didn't happen. I was curious about HR. And I also wanted to write a newspaper column. Thankfully, some of those didn't come off, but at that point I was maintaining a CV for each of those and foregrounding the experience that was most relevant to those different opportunities. And then when a specific role came up in one of those areas, I would take the one of those four CVs that was most relevant. And so it might be the same if you're curious about GNC, but also flight dynamics. You might keep two CVs and then just modulate them from there to get the most relevant one. Do all professional CVs tend not to use first person dialogue? I see in the examples that no one's used words like I, my, or we. I think they were just examples. We definitely do see that sometimes. I think it's less likely because it's a more formalized document. So it's more likely that you would talk about it objectively, but you can still talk about your own capabilities in and your own impact in the first person. But it's not as common, um, mostly because we're looking for an objective set of documents and an objective set of outcomes. Um, and so I think it's not not outlawed. It's not bad practice to do that. But I would try and limit it to specifically where you're talking about your own impact. Are there overused words and phrases that you don't like to see on a CV? Um, I would say at the early career level, I really don't love to see the word expert. Um, I struggle to use the word expert in my CV 10 years down the line. And I know people significantly more experienced than I am that refuse to use that word as well. So I think you can build capability. I think you have knowledge, you have skills. But I think to claim expertise coming straight out of your degree is a word I would be really, really cautious about using unless you're really certain that you can back it up if put under technical fire. What is your view on cover letters? And small disclaimer, my view is my own and is not reflective of Astroscale UK. I don't like cover letters. I don't really agree with the purpose of them. I don't write them when I apply to jobs. And I think in most contexts, they're not really very useful. There are odd examples. So if I were changing significantly changing domain or changing the role that I do, I may use a cover letter in that example. And the same if a candidate is coming from something that might seem like an unlikely start in their career. Having that extra space of something like a cover letter to justify why are your skills and experience transferable in a bit more depth than you're really afforded in the spacing of a CV can be a really useful version of a cover letter. But I would say that a good 90% of the cover letters I've seen are not worth the effort that people have gone to write them, because generally they go along the lines of, I've seen the role that you're advertising and I would like to apply for it. Well, I know that you've applied for it. That's how your cover letters come to me. And then it rehashes the stuff that they've already told me in their CV. And so actually, it's not added any value above and beyond what their CV had already told me. I see Jacob came off mute there, and I'm assuming that's because we're at time.
No, I just wanted to jump in and say we've got, I think, 5 questions left. So I think if you're okay, we can run through and do those 5, and then we'll finish it there.
Okay,
Great.
perfect. Let me double check. So, what do you think, or what do you or Astroscale think of the arms race between applicants and recruiters in the use of AI? That's a really great question, actually. I think we've reached a bit of a stalemate, if I'm honest. I think there are a lot of technology providers that are still claiming that AI will make all of our lives massively easier in the recruitment space. My level of trust in a lot of AI is minimal. Um, I, 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 I don't yet know of any business that is exclusively using AI to do their recruitment process. And I've had a lot of conversations with other organizations where they've tried things like AI screeners. Um, so where you do your first interview with essentially an AI chatbot, but that they verbalize it, and actually they found that the dropout rate for candidates is much higher when they're not talking to a human being. People have put in the time and effort to apply to your organization, and I can understand why candidates then don't feel it's valuable or they don't feel valued by organizations where they can't spare 30 minutes of a human being's time to talk to them about that application if they're interested in hiring that individual. Equally, when I receive CVs and cover letters that I suspect to be heavily produced using generative AI, I'm also very much not inclined to want to progress with that application, again because it seems like they haven't really made the effort themselves and they're perhaps a little bit over reliant. We are in the process of working on an AI and recruitment policy for us here at Astroscale, which we're intending to publish on our website, essentially giving guidance about where we do and don't want to see the use of AI. So kind of touching back on some of the things I said about it being a really good drafting tool and a really good practice tool, we will really heavily encourage, but obviously using it to get yourself through technical interviews, we have an absolute zero tolerance for, and have unfortunately had instances where we've had to decline to continue with candidates because we have had suspicions that they're using AI to answer technical questions. Is it sensible to bold keywords that highlight important or relevant skills? Absolutely. It's a really great thing to do. You can also section them off, so you can have a specific kind of tools or a skills section if there are certain capabilities you want to highlight. So some people like to do a little personal introduction, a kind of personal statement up at the top. I don't think it's necessary, but it can be helpful if you have something useful to say. I think if all you're doing is restating your education and the job you're applying to or the career you'd like to have, I would honestly save the space. And I would either put in a skills and a tools section instead, or I would just dive into my application. Are cover letters seen by recruiters before they see an applicant's CV? Generally, no. If you submit a cover letter, often they're seen at the same time. Sometimes, depending upon the organisation, they are seen later in the process. I do know some ATSs that just by asking for them as part of the application, sometimes they're not seen at all. So it really varies from organisation to organisation, but most often they are available to the recruiter at the same time as the CV is. So you can flick back and forward between the two documents. Is it better to gain some work experience in a space or space adjacent industry first, or pursue a graduate space related degree right after graduating from a bachelor's? I think this is really personal. I don't think there is necessarily a better or worse in this instance. It does seem to be the case, and I'm not really sure how this has evolved, but the vast majority of individuals seem to be pursuing master's degrees to come into the space industry. I don't know if that's something that's being perpetuated, but I don't know that many organisations that are specifically requiring a master's degree for entry level positions. However, it does seem to be the norm. So I know a lot of people and engineering courses quite often are an intercalated MSc. So maybe that's where the trend has started. I don't think either is particularly necessary. I would say if you have the opportunity coming out of your bachelor's degree to go straight into a space environment and some space experience, I would grab it with both hands. I think that's great. Why would you spend another £10,000 if you don't necessarily have to get the job that you want after the master's degree anyway? And the other thing I would say is that just because you join an organization doesn't mean that your education journey has to stop. I did my master's degree, or I started it 2 years after I'd been in the working world, and I did it part time whilst I was studying, whilst I was working. Sorry, we actually had one of our 2023 graduates did the graduate scheme and then chose to go back to academia. So he's actually gone off to do a PhD in astrophysics. And I promise it's not because he hated his job here at Astroscale. But I think if you have that opportunity after your bachelor's, don't feel forced to have to go and do a master's degree. We are seeing a much more flexible industry being created. We're seeing more routes and more opportunities become available for individuals to join the industry. There are a huge number of apprenticeships being worked on and vocational routes at the moment, which probably doesn't help the majority of people on this call who've already committed to a university degree. But more to say that the industry is becoming a lot more flexible, and I think we will see degree specific or degree requirements on jobs and opportunities start to change a lot more, and already that has become more flexible than it was. And I think I'm up to date. Have I missed any questions, Jacob?
I've just got one final question that was, did Astroscale UK hire any international students for the 2025 cohorts?
So we didn't in the end. So we did have some in the mix, but we unfortunately this year so in 2023 we didn't really have very many entry criteria at all to be able to come and do the technical quiz. But for 2025, unfortunately, we did have to put in the requirement that that individuals were able to they had the independent right to work, so they wouldn't need sponsorship. So we don't have any international students in the 2025 cohort, but we do still have a huge number of international employees. So we are 31 different nationalities here at Astroscale, and about 25% of our working population are on sponsored visas.
Hey, excellent. So we'll bring it to a close there. Thanks so much, Bethan. I'm going to just put you on the spot quickly before we end.
Dun, dun, dun.
if you had just one piece of advice or one thing that people could take away today, what would you say?
Keep trying. So I think the one skill I haven't talked about today that is the most important thing that you could build up for any career, but particularly for a career in space, is resilience. And so anybody that had the misfortune of coming to NSSC and saw my talk last year, that was all about resilience. And so it's so important that no is not the end of your journey. It's not the end of the sentence, and that you really need to find a way to pick yourself up from that disappointment and to continue. There are so many opportunities. There are so many fantastic things. Even if you do get a job in the space industry, things will inevitably go wrong. You know, spacecraft don't turn on after launch sometimes. Missions lose funding and get stopped mid-process. You know, space is not an easy industry. Work is not easy in most contexts. And so having an ability to be able to move on past those disappointing things and to continue and to drive yourself in the things that you're passionate about will stand you in really good stead. And eventually you will find a thing that you love and you'll find a way to do the thing that you love, whether that means you join a rocketry competition and you're, you know, spending your weekends launching things in the middle of the countryside, whether you join something like the Space Generation Advisory Council and you continue to support space as a hobby. You know, astrophotography, there are so many ways to stay involved in space that aren't having a job in the industry. And even if you have a job in the industry, there are lots of ways to make sure that that's as fulfilling as possible for you.
Amazing, brilliant. So, yeah, say thanks again to you, Bethan, and to Astroscale for being with us today, and thanks for everyone who's attended. Just a final reminder that we'll be uploading this session to YouTube afterwards. So if you want to go back and look at some of the questions again, you can do. And yeah, with that, we'll bring it to a close and say goodbye. Right.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.